All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started on our second panel for the day. For this one, we're going to turn from how to foster innovation in a more general sense to how that innovation can be harnessed and channeled into solving specific social problems. We're going to turn it over to Professor Joanna Shepard-Bailey from Emory, and she's going to introduce the panelists and get everything started.
Great. Well, thank you guys for staying for the after lunch period. We have a great panel today. I'm just going to give a brief intro of each of the panelists and what they'll be discussing, and then I will turn it over to the people who have something more important to say than I do. Our first speaker today is Kyle Westway. Kyle is a social entrepreneur and attorney based in New York City. He's the founding partner of Westway Law, an innovative law firm that counsels social entrepreneurs. As one of the preeminent attorneys focusing on the emerging sector of social enterprise, Mr. Westway writes for several blogs and publications, including the Harvard Business Review and the Wall Street Journal, about the power of markets to create a positive social and environmental change. He gives frequent lectures on the topic, including for the social entrepreneurship courses at both Harvard and Stanford Law. Today, he's going to speak about Adam Smith's theory of capitalism and how it applies to fiduciary duty. Specifically, he will be discussing an emerging new business structure called the Benefit Corporation. Our second speaker will be Dana Brockman-Reiser, who is a professor of law at Brooklyn Law School and is the chair of the AALS section on nonprofit and philanthropy law section. Her recent scholarship focuses on the legal and social ramifications of the increasing trend towards hybridization of nonprofit and for-profit endeavors. She's also written extensively on nonprofit accountability and governance and the role of members and other non-fiduciary constituencies in nonprofit organizations. Today, Professor Brockman-Reiser will be discussing hybrid forms of social enterprise. These hybrid forms blend elements traditionally found in nonprofit organizations, like the commitment to a social mission, with elements for-profit businesses, like the ability to track investor owners. As a result, they offer founders and investors the ability to do well by doing good. She will explore what a hybrid forms would have to provide in order to realize their claim potential. Our third speaker is Professor Robert Katz, who is on the faculty at the Indiana University School of Law in Indianapolis. He also holds a joint appointment with the Indiana University Center of Philanthropy. He's an expert in the law of nonprofit organizations and is president-elect of the AALS Nonprofit and Philanthropy Law section. His recent scholarship focuses on social enterprise and for-profit enterprises that seek to combine profitability with social mission. He currently is researching the tension between the uses of social enterprise to mitigate human misery while also pursuing environmental sustainability. In his presentation, Professor Katz will discuss the triple bottom line of socially responsible corporations: profits, people, and planet. Although businesses have long been concerned with creating profits for shareholders, he will explain how sustainable business entities should have two other goals as well: improving the lives of the people, such as employees, and also advancing the goals of environmental sustainability. Our final speaker today will be Professor Dennis Leota, who is the senior Samuel Candler Dobbs Professor of Chemistry at Emory University. While at Emory, he has authored more than 200 research publications and patents. Over the last 15 years, he has also developed a great deal of experience in the discovery and development of pharmaceuticals. In collaboration with two colleagues, Professor Leota developed a breakthrough antiviral drug for the treatment of HIV that is now used by more than 90% of HIV and AIDS patients in the United States and by thousands more around the globe. For years, Professor Leota strove to establish a biotechnology company focused on the needs of the developing world. In 2008, he established this company called Intemba in Johannesburg, South Africa. One of Professor Leota's passions is global health, and today he will discuss a new mechanism for drug development in an academic setting. He will discuss how this mechanism will address currently unmet medical needs in the developing world. So please join me in welcoming our speakers today.
It's really good to be here. It is not great to be the guy that's speaking right after lunch. So I hope that I can keep you awake and hope that you guys enjoy what we have to talk about. I'm just really impressed by my fellow panelists, and I think that they'll have a lot of interesting insight. So what I want to talk about today is conscious capitalism. And if anybody is tweeting out there, you can use either one of these Twitter handles. So I want to start out telling you a little bit about myself. I just want to start out by saying I'm not this guy. I am not a professor. I don't teach anywhere. I pop in for guest lectures every now and then. But I want to tell you who I am. I'm this guy. I'm a lawyer. And I thought I would go with the cheesiest picture of lawyers that I could find on the internet, and this guy wins. Trust me, you should do a search. It's amazing. But my practice is really focused on helping to empower businesses that think that they can use business to affect positive social and environmental change. That's a term that we're going to call social entrepreneurship, or is being called social entrepreneurship. And you'll be hearing a lot about that from our fellow panelists as well. And lastly, I'm sometimes this guy. So this is me in March in Bangkok trying to learn how to be a screen printer. And I promise you I'm not that great at that either. The reason why I was there, though, is because me and a couple of my friends are launching a fashion brand that employs survivors of the commercial sex trade in Southeast Asia. And so this was an attempt to kind of learn what our women do really, really well, which is make great clothes. So this is kind of my perspective. I'm coming at it from a practitioner standpoint. I'm coming at it from a social entrepreneurship standpoint. And I also want to talk a little bit, today we're going to talk about this guy. And this is Adam Smith, kind of the father of modern economics. He wrote some fairly influential stuff that kind of really shaped the way we think about free markets. But before I get there, before I get to Adam Smith's theories, I want to start with where we are right now and the current sense of what capitalism is and what it does and whether that's a positive or negative thing. So this raging left-wing rag called The Economist recently had a cover called Rage Against the Machine. And it was in September, I believe, October, and it was talking about the Occupy movement. And I raised the Occupy movement. There's certainly a lot of critique in that movement, but I raise it for this reason. I really believe that it highlights the current angst of particularly my generation with what the capitalist system has to offer. And I think some of the very legitimate claims that it's making is that our current version of capitalism is unstable and it's unsustainable. So on the instability standpoint, from an economic standpoint, we're seeing booms and busts becoming more frequent and with greater magnitude as we move forward. This creates a huge amount of instability. As far as unsustainability goes, we're consuming about 1.5 times the resources that we have on the planet, and this is obviously unsustainable. So the current version of capitalism, I think in a lot of ways has had many successes. I feel we are reaching some of the limits of the current version of capitalism, and that's why it's under attack, and I think rightly so. There are a lot of different reactions to it. I think my reaction is really going back to the roots and seeing what was capitalism envisioned to be by Adam Smith, kind of the father of modern economics. But before we get there, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. If you guys a lot of you have been through law school and know the case Dodge v. Ford, whereby we get this alleged fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value. I'm not going to get into the debate of whether that duty exists or not, because I think there is actually a really strong debate. What I'm going to talk about for a second is how this duty has impacted how we view capitalism now. So you start back with Dodge v. Ford, and there is a sense that the decision of the court said the only purpose of a corporation has to be to make money for the shareholders. We see this kind of progressing throughout the century, and we get to kind of a case called Revlon, where there is a huge a takeover bid being made by an outside takeover for a company called Revlon, and the Revlon rules, or the outcome of that case, says that at the moment of change of control, that the company has to go with the highest bidder, whether or not they want to. We see kind of in comes the big 80s, where there's a bunch of hostile takeovers happening. You can think about Gordon Gekko, Greed is Good, and there's a lot of takeovers and a lot of breakups of companies. And what we saw then in the 80s, and what we're kind of actually seeing a little bit now, is really the decimation of local economies, because all of the companies are broken up, offshored, split apart, sold off. So states started to push back a little bit, and many states put in what we call a constituency statute, and that says that corporations, directors specifically, may make decisions if they want to that take into consideration something other than maximizing shareholder value. We're going to refer to that today as maximizing stakeholder value, and I'm going to unpack that a little bit later on in the talk. But so to where we are right now is that some states have constituency statutes that allow you permissively to take into account other stakeholders other than shareholders. So we have a system that, again, kind of going back to this unstable and unsustainable system. The question I like to ask is this what Smith intended? So Smith wrote two primary works. He wrote a lot of stuff, but kind of the things he's known most for are two primary works. The first is The Wealth of Nations, which everybody in here knows about, very, very known for. The invisible hand is kind of brought up in there, and the idea that self-interest is good for the whole. But what is talked about a little bit less, except for in some circles, is the book The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which Adam Smith himself considers his most important work. He wrote it before the Wealth of Nations, and he considered it to be kind of his lasting legacy. He thought that would be what he was known for in the long run. This talks about something apparently totally different. It talks about self-restraint and our duty to others. So it talks about our duty to our peers and the government's duty to ourselves, and our duty peer-to-peer within kind of market relationships. So these two kind of lead a lot of scholars to ask this question: was Adam Smith a schizophrenic? Though there's a lot of great scholarship that would say he is, there is some really great scholarship that says he's not, and I fall within that second class. And I think that what he was trying to put together was a unified theory of capitalism. This unified theory says that self-interest has to be grounded in an idea of there is a duty to others, that we have to understand the free market within context of larger social dynamics. So it's the self-interest plus duty to others, what we're going to call today conscious capitalism. I could spend the rest of the time talking about conscious capitalism, but what I'm going to talk about is a very specific mechanism by which conscious capitalism is being applied currently. So there is a new type of corporation, a new class of corporation called the benefit corporation that is currently been passed in 7 states. It will go live in New York tomorrow. I fly from here to Albany to hand in the first benefit corporation papers for companies in New York tomorrow. So it's very new, very cutting edge, and the reason I bring it up in this talk is because it treats fiduciary duties. It really makes an epic shift of fiduciary duties. So we're going to talk through that a little bit. The benefit corporation is a new class of corporation. It creates a material positive benefit and increases transparency and accountability. So this is a new legal structure in the same way you have an LLC or a corporation or an S-corp. This is a new type of legal structure. And it produces an immense shift in fiduciary duty that has kind of been unseen up to this point in time. What it says is that you as directors now have a duty to not just the shareholder, but a higher or a larger number of stakeholders, including community, environment, employees, suppliers, and there's a few more that we'll get through here in a second. So first of all, there's a mandate to create a general public benefit, and this is the definition right here, right from the legislation itself. A material positive benefit on society and environment taken as a whole, assessed against a third-party standard from the business operations of a benefit corporation. I think that's really clear. I don't know if you guys do. It's like pretty self-evident. No chuckles on that one? Okay. It's really, what does this even mean? Like, how do you even quantify any of this? It's going to be an interesting process of unpacking that. But our best kind of guess of what this means at this point in time is that the actions of the corporation as a whole have to be creating a positive impact on the environment and society, kind of both axes, as assessed by a third-party standard. So third-party assessors are independent, are transparent bodies that assess how socially and environmentally conscious a business is. What the law requires is every year you get assessed by a third-party assessor, or you measure yourself against a third-party assessment tool, and then you bring those reports public. So you have a measurement of transparency and accountability. The goal being that by putting this information public, that the benefit corporation will start to operate in a more socially and environmentally responsible manner. So I'm going to talk through in the last couple minutes what the fiduciary duty of the board is now. And this is, again, straight from the legislation. I would love to take questions at the end about what any of this means or afterwards in the reception, but I'm going to kind of blow through this right now. So the board must consider its ability to accomplish its general and specific purpose. It must consider its shareholders. So shareholders are not taken out of the equation. They're just now one member in the equation. Has to consider its employees and workforce, and the employees and workforce of subsidiaries and suppliers. So you think about this in the context of recent news around Apple and about their supply chain and the labor included in their supply chain. The interest in the customers as beneficiaries of the public benefit. So if customers are impacted environmentally or socially, you need to take that into consideration. And then the community and societal considerations. So how are we impacting our local community? And then the local and global environment. What is our carbon footprint? And how are we dumping waste into the local river? The board must consider its short-term and long-term interests, including benefits that may accrue to it from long-term plans and the possibility that these interests may be best served by continued independence of the benefit corporation. This clause is essentially saying that at the moment of a hostile takeover, or when takeovers are on the table, the benefit corporation can choose to turn down the highest bid if they so choose, kind of taking the Revlon rule off the table, or they can choose to remain independent or choose a lower bid. And then the board may consider, this is not a must, this is a may, the resources, intent, and conduct past and stated and potential of any person seeking to take control. So if you know that there is a Unilever wanting to take over your business and you feel that their intentions are not in line with your social or environmental mission, you can make decisions based on that. The board is not required to give priority to one interest over another, so there's no requirement to put, say, environment over shareholders or shareholders over community, but they can if they cite it as a specific purpose with which they're trying to do. So I guess I want to close by saying, I know this is a lot of information to dump at you guys, and I know this is really new information for a lot of you. I would love to talk through any of this with you afterwards, but this concept of conscious capitalism is taking root. There's a growing movement across the nation, and I'm excited to be a part of that. If you guys are interested in joining the conversation, this is the blog that talks about this type of law, social enterprise law, socentlaw.com, or you can follow socentlaw or myself on Twitter. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate your attention.
Good afternoon. So I'm always nervous, like Kyle said he was, when I have to talk after lunch, but now I have to also talk after Kyle, and I don't have any slides, it's just me, so, you know, I'll try to move around a lot or something. So our panel was asked to think about and speak about how the law can shape the evolution of social entrepreneurship as a mechanism for positive change. That seemed like a big job. So I tried to carve out a piece of it and talk about how the law's kind of menu of new forms of organization, the benefit corporation is only one of them, there's kind of a whole new menu of forms for organizations that are engaged in social enterprise or social entrepreneurship that are starting to be formed in different jurisdictions around the country as well as across the globe. And so I want to try to think through, I've done a bunch of work examining each of these as they come out, and how each of the forms has tried to solve some of the sticky issues in creating a form of organization for social enterprise. And what I'm trying to do here is think more broadly than about one particular form, and rather think about, well, what is it that social entrepreneurs think they need from a new form and won't be provided by traditional forms of organization, either for-profit or nonprofit, and my background is in nonprofit research. What is it that social entrepreneurs think they need, and is it possible for a form of organization to actually achieve their goals? Are they asking too much? Are they asking not enough? Are they asking the wrong questions? Is there something that we should be focusing on in either developing forms for social enterprise or watching what's kind of a natural experiment with these various forms for social enterprise to see which one solves the key problem? What is that key problem? So that's what I'm looking at today. So the starting point is, well, why do social entrepreneurs say they need new forms? And as Kyle explained, these are folks who want to do more good for more people while also using business methods, including making profits for themselves or for equity-type investors. And they say that the limitations on either traditional for-profit forms of organization or traditional nonprofit forms of organization really limit their ability to pursue this kind of bold new way to achieve social change. The backward old law forces them into one of two categories. Either they have to become a for-profit, an LLC, a partnership, a for-profit corporation, or they have to become a nonprofit, usually a nonprofit corporation in this country, occasionally a charitable trust. And they say if they form a for-profit, they're stuck in this value maximization place where they have to single-mindedly focus on shareholder value maximization, either because the law forces them to or because the practical norms of operating in the for-profit space will require them to do so. That's if they set up a for-profit corporation. Of course, they could set up an LLC or a partnership and have much more flexibility and kind of buy-in from owners about the goals of their organization. But they say there are problems with scale. Right? If you want to be able to go really big and do the really huge change, you need to be able to incorporate. And then on the nonprofit side, they say, well, if they form a nonprofit, then they're going to have this problem that social vision is going to be protected, right? Their ability to achieve a social good, but crucial business strategies, particularly attracting equity investment, is just foreclosed, right? A nonprofit cannot distribute its net earnings to those who have control over it. That would include shareholders, and so that's just off the table if they set up a nonprofit, and this too is unattractive. So, as I said, there's been this spate of new forms. Some of the European countries moved first, including the UK, with something called the Community Interest Company. In the US, there's an LLC-based form, the Low Profit Limited Liability Company. There's also the Benefit Corporation that Kyle mentioned. There's a new form available now only in, you can adopt it no matter where you are, but you have to incorporate in California if you'd like to use the Flexible Purpose Corporation form. So there's really a proliferation of these. I'd be happy to take questions on the specifics because I've now studied all the ones that are out and know a little bit more about that. But I want to take this kind of theoretical question for now and say, well, what does any such form need to do to be effective at achieving the goals that social entrepreneurs have? So what is it that they want to do? Well, the first thing they want to do is they want to be able to brazenly articulate, right, and also effectively enforce a dual mission, right? They want to be able to go out there and say, we do both here at our social enterprise. We achieve profits and we achieve social goods. They want to be able to say that out loud and not hide it, and they want to be able to enforce it. And building on that, they want to do that in part because they want to brand their enterprises as meaningfully distinct from both traditional nonprofits and traditional for-profits, right? They're not the bad old business or the inefficient, clunky, clubby nonprofit, right? They're something new and different and better. And they've got lots of folks they want to send this branding message to. They want to send it to folks who might support them in the capital markets with their investment dollars. They want to send this message to folks in the product market, consumers who might pay more for a product that blends both efficiency and social conscience. They want to attract employees, differentiate themselves in the labor market as a different kind of company that would be better to work for. And at lots of other points in their supply chain, they want to be able to send this message that they're different. So if that's what they want to do, they want to articulate and enforce this dual mission so that they can brand effectively to these various folks. How can a form of organization do that, right? Well, the articulation thing, the forms all do pretty well. They all allow you to go out there and say, we're different, we're doing both. We're pursuing profit for owners, but we're also pursuing a social mission. The concern, though, is enforcement, right? Articulation of a dual mission is just the label, right? And there have been some problems with that. It's hard to do it in a nonprofit. You can't say we're going to give profit to shareholders clearly. It's hard to do it in a for-profit for all kinds of practical reasons, including, I'm told, the Secretary of State in California won't accept articles of incorporation that state there's a social mission as part of the for-profit corporation's charter. So all of the forms allow you to do that really clearly, and that's a benefit. But the harder thing is how to enforce it. Right? Social entrepreneurs want to be able to enforce the idea that profit and social good can be traded off against each other, and they're concerned about two important time horizons, right? And Kyle already mentioned this. They're concerned about kind of day-to-day in making their decisions. They want to be able to trade those off and sometimes favor social good over profit, and sometimes the reverse. And likewise, at a point of the long run, right? How do they kind of embed their legacy, right? How do they make sure that this dual mission persists over time, even if there are new folks eventually in control, which can happen in a takeover situation, but also in other situations. So they want some kind of enforcement mechanism. And there are a lot of different ways that you could enforce a dual mission as part of an organizational form that's enabled by legislation. So drawing on my nonprofit background, I first think of public regulation. That's what we have in the nonprofit sphere. And there's been some experimentation with this with social enterprise forms. The UK form has a public regulator. One state, Illinois, has partially adopted public regulation for a social enterprise form that it adopted. But in the main, this seems an unlikely solution, right? We're in a time of great constraint on state resources, and nonprofit regulation is incredibly underfunded. I can't imagine there's going to suddenly be new funds to publicly regulate social enterprises. And in fact, I'm told in many of the legislative efforts to pass these new forms of organization, the Attorney General of the state has agreed to support or not reject, right, or not oppose the legislation only if they are assured they will not have to regulate, right? Because they don't have enough resources to regulate what they're responsible for regulating already. So public enforcement seems unlikely at the state level. Drafting the IRS into this project seems unlikely as well and would require significant investment. I cannot imagine new agencies being formed like the one in the UK specifically to regulate these entities here. So private enforcement seems like a much more likely scenario to develop. But who, right? Who is going to do the private enforcement here? And you could look at a lot of different groups to potentially enforce this idea of dual mission. Maybe investors, employees, consumers, even the public at large. None of the existing forms tap this large a range or diverse a range of potential enforcers, although I will explore more types and more options in my paper here in my talk. I'm just going to look at two that are currently in use by some of these forms that have been created. And these are either investors using a modified fiduciary duty model, a bit like Kyle referred to, and also relying on third-party certifying agencies, specifically tasked with enforcement duties, which the benefit corporation also has elements of. So for enforcement by either of these private groups to be effective, the enforcers need disclosures, right? They need to know relevant information so they can judge compliance with dual mission. They need to be empowered to take some kind of effective action on that information, and they need to have incentives to actually take those actions, right? So first, looking at investors, some of the forms have really pushed on the disclosure idea and giving more disclosures to investors so that they know what kinds of decisions are being made in terms of trading off profit and social mission. I don't think the disclosures are perfect, but they certainly have made great steps in that area. Let's assume the disclosure is enough. It gives them enough information for investors to make decisions about compliance. But what can they do with that information? What can they do to actually enforce? Well, if you have a for-profit, if you have a social enterprise corporate entity, right, with shareholders, and all of these forms kind of are tweaks on the existing forms. They don't create a lot of new rules. So taking the kind of for-profit corporate analog, investors might participate through voting, right? Shareholders have votes on various things, including who's a director. Or they might bring a fiduciary duty type claim. Well, I'm not going to hold my breath for shareholder voting to do a lot of work, because I don't think it's proven to do a lot of work so far in corporate America, and I don't think this is going to be the place where it makes its debut. And the fiduciary duty point is really complicated with a dual mission entity, because Kyle is right. You can say you have fiduciary duties to consider the interests of various types of stakeholders. You can make that kind of process fiduciary duty argument. But then if you want to judge compliance and you want to hold the fiduciaries to account for failures, and they can say, well, I considered all those things, and I decided to prioritize X. You'd want me to prioritize Y, but I don't have to. I don't know how you're going to get liability there, right? I'm worried about enforcement in a kind of multiple masters situation. In other types of for-profit entities, like an LLC type structure, you could imagine contracting, right, for greater management decision-making power or enforcement powers on the part of individual owners, the members of a limited liability company. But those aren't, so far, those additional rights are not part of the organizational forms that have been adopted. Right? They're individualized structures that folks would have to adopt, and which can be really effective, but you can do with the existing forms too, right? You can do that on an LLC as it already exists. You can even do that in a more closely held corporation where you have a lot of trust in a small group of shareholders. You can weight voting, you can maintain control. There are a lot of individualized structures that can be used here. It's not going to make that form of organization a brand that tells people profit and social good are going to be traded off in consistent and enforceable ways that I can predict and rely upon. So I have a lot of concerns about investors as enforcers, and then there's the alternative of a certifying agency, a third party. And this is another good idea, one I think we should experiment with, but we have to be aware, right, that a certifying agency needs enough folks to use its standard in order for folks to think it means something, right? We all know what the good housekeeping seal of approval is because people use it. But there are tons of seals of approval. We don't know what they mean, right? So they're not effective, right? So the certifier needs to get enough folks to adopt the standard to get a network effect, for it to be of any use, right? But that puts them in this very tough spot of creating standards that are meaningful enough, right, that they're going to do some work and weed out the good from the bad, right? But also lax enough that enough people can make the cut, right? And get certified. And we just haven't yet seen if certifying agencies in this space are going to be able to do that in this tricky multi-stakeholder context. And I am not as confident in the way that this works out under the benefit corporation statutes that are out there as Kyle seems to be, but I think it's an avenue worth pursuing. The last thing I want to mention is this enforcement question, I think, is key, not just for its own sake, right? Not just because social entrepreneurs want enforcement. Because if they want enforcement, they have a lot of incentives to create enforcement mechanisms for their own individual entities. It's important if you want to create a category of social enterprises and a brand linked to a form of organization. Because the way a brand is useful is if it reliably means something. And the folks that you want to brand to, if you're a social entrepreneur, are these investors and consumers and employees who are going to put their resources into your enterprise. And I don't think they're going to do so on the basis of a brand made up by a form of organization, unless there's some kind of realistic, consistent, predictable level of enforcement that folks know what it is that they're contributing to. So I'll look forward to your questions. Thank you.
So much water up here, I may drown. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So my talk is going to build on one aspect of what Dana and, please, Kyle, okay, have been talking about. And if you notice, like Kyle was talking about social mission and environmental mission, and Dana was talking about social mission. And so what's going on here is that somewhere along the way, the environmental mission got separated out and made an independent standard or independent criteria or value. And I want to talk about that because it's interesting, and I think it was done without full consideration of what it meant. That's one thing I want to do. Another thing I want to do is I want to explain the triple bottom line. It didn't, in context of a long-standing discussion, that it didn't sort of just drop out of the sky. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so when someone says to you triple bottom line business, the slogan is profits, people, planet. Right? Create profit for shareholders, improve the lives with people whom it interacts, that's the social, and planet advances the goal of environmental sustainability. And that's why sometimes the term triple bottom line and sustainable business will be used interchangeably. And as I said, it's part of a long-standing, ongoing discussion about the proper role of for-profit businesses in our society, in our world. And let me place it there. So back in the day, there were two options for bottom lines. There was one bottom line, for-profit, maximize shareholder wealth, or not just one bottom line. How many? You know, just sort of more, not just one. And this was the debate, right? And we had people like Milton Friedman saying it's just one, to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits. Single bottom line, okay. And then there were the people who argued, no, it's not just one. Controllers are obliged to do more than simply maximize, and you evaluate the firm not simply. Okay, so if it's not just that, what is it? And as Kyle mentioned, it's accountability or responsiveness to stakeholders. And so So it says here, the firm, this is a normative claim. A business firm should be managed in a way to achieve a balance among the interests of its stakeholders, which goes beyond non-shareholders. And in fact, the very purpose of the firm is to spread the wealth or spread the responsiveness amongst stakeholders. And when environmental concerns are raised, as they have been raised more frequently recently, they are presented as a subset of social performance. So you could say this is like an anthropocentric evaluation of the environment. What can the environment do for us, right? And are we maintaining the conditions? And the strongest, most robust iteration of corporate social responsibility was progressive corporate law, and so I call it stakeholderism on steroids. And it responds to natural questions that pop up, and it gave really strong answers and definitive answers. Who are stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders? Well, the corporation is like a team of people generating wealth. And so the members of that team are the stakeholders, the people who are contributing to the wealth. Well, and then saying non-shareholding stakeholders deserve a more equitable allocation of the surplus they're all generating through this corporation team, and more say in the decision making. And one of the reasons, why do they deserve it? Well, because it had to do with the firm-specific investments. If you're a worker there or the local community, you're investing in a particular firm, and your investment is rather illiquid, and whereas shareholders, they can just recover their capital, and so the risks aren't being fairly distributed relative to profits. And how do we do this? As Kyle said, right, we enact statutes authorizing directors to consider other constituencies, and also put stakeholder representatives on the board. And you can have at least one representing the workers, and then an independent director representing the community. So that was stakeholders. And what's happened more recently is very interesting. I call it the response to the question, okay, well, where does law fit in all this? What can law do? What can law help? And so what's happened is what I call the social entrepreneurial turn. So the question that was being asked before is, well, can we use organizational law to get non-shareholder stakeholders a more equitable share of the surplus, more say? Okay, now there's a different question being asked, which is, can we use organizational law to promote social innovation? Equitable distribution is one person's conception of social innovation, but others have their own idiosyncratic but plausible public benefits they want to pursue. And so we say, well, how can organizational law help social entrepreneurs pre-commit to pursuing dual goals, which is what Dana has talked about, provide other people with credible assurance that they're going to stay committed. And so that's where the new hybrid forms come in, and as Dana ably analyzed them, ably, it's like super ably, right? Okay, and so you will, when you see, these are all the words brought up, the phrases, taglines for this sort of, social enterprises, social entrepreneurs that really aim to be something other than a big, long-standing corporation that has been badgered or into behaving more responsibly. For example, for-profits with a non-profit soul. Right, that's sort of, and so, right, so Dana calls this, well, this is a dual mission. These are hybrids, a double bottom line. And we now are talking, as Kyle was, about now social and environmental, as a freestanding. And this has been a rather seamless transition. It's sort of, I don't actually know the moment. I have to go when people just started talking about triple bottom lines as though it were, as though nothing had happened, right? There's triple bottom lines, okay. And it may have been too hasty because some of these statutes actually make environmentalism not an option. It's part of the package. So, for example, in the Virginia Benefit Corporation, the statute says, as Kyle says, you have to have a positive environmental outcome. You actually have to do something that helps the environment. Not only that, when you're making decisions, you have to consider the impact on the environment. It's no longer sort of, oh, this is one that you may consider. Like, no, you have to. And you have to disclose. You have to give a public annual report that describes your environmental performance according to a third-party standard, as Dana was explaining. And so I just want to explain, identify some consequences to this. Well, one is that it curtails the social entrepreneur's autonomy. This is sort of an elaboration of the story that Dana was relaying, that social entrepreneurs say, well, you're forcing us into either a for-profit or a non-profit, and that doesn't really get at what we want to do. Well, guess what? You do now have a third option, but you only get it if you take on these sort of mandatory environmental mandates. So we are affirmatively requiring these benefit corporations to do more than simply good faith comply with the existing environmental laws. That's different. That's an innovation. Second, before we do this, and when we do this, we should consider, is this a good idea? So, I've been starting to mull it over, and I'd like some feedback. Maybe it's not such a great idea, and because what it does is it puts a mandate in, more or less, in every benefit corporation to be green. But we all know from the cap and trade arrangement that, well, some corporations can become greener more efficiently, and we want to encourage the most efficient greenifying that we can get, and so we'll let people trade off. And so you don't have to be as green as the next guy because you're buying credits, and that really seems inconsistent with these for-profits with the non-profit soul. The sort of the defining characteristic or what is presented as a social enterprise is that it's not just corporate philanthropy. It's not just we're raising money and we're doing nice things on the side. It's that the mission is somehow built into what we're doing. So the more business we do, the more good things we are creating. And that's back in the Virginia statute. It'll say, this is the part I cut out, it says it's part of your operation. And so to have one of these benefit corporations just pollute a lot and then buy environmental credits just seems, that's not what this is about. It seems to go against the grain. And so, again, we're imposing a constraint on these organizations that may not be efficient because, I don't know, there is, the use of the word soul is not incidental here. There is sort of, metaphysics of the soul of corporation. These are expressions of my identity. Corporation is an extension of that. Okay, so, we're helping people work things out and, identify their place in the world. Okay, that's fine, and maybe this is a trade-off we're making, but let's just identify what the trade-off is. And so it's really interesting, because when I started doing this, I was reading the literature, and then I just saw, dual mission, hybrid, triple bottom line, and it's like, well, why is it so easy to go from one? And so to a lot of people, it just seems self-evident. It's just sort of a natural progression. Of course, we have two bottom lines. A third one's even better, right? It's a neat idea. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could find a business activity that advances the interests of the shareholders, of society, and the environment, right? Would it be great if, like, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, you could eat, you'd lose weight from eating more. It just sounds like, wouldn't that be wonderful? What a wonderful world it would be. And, people are pushing it. We got 3 bottom lines. So 2 weeks ago, I heard someone make a pitch for a 4th bottom line, spirituality. And so, and this is part of, now we are, why are we going to a 3rd bottom line? Well, because it reflects that we're having a spiritual lifting. We're reaching through the next level to nirvana. Some other neat ideas, the four-bladed quattro, and this is a 6-bladed razor, I found. Okay, so what's happening? Where did stakeholderism go, right? And so we had this conceptual category from corporate social responsibility that, what happened to it? I mean, and they're inconsistent. So the question is, is nature or the planet one of these non-shareholding stakeholders that's getting an unfair portion of the surplus? If we start trying to stuff it into that category, the category just sort of, starts dissolving. And I read this yesterday that, the PETA sought protection for whales under, as they're being treated by slaves, and the judge said, no, the constitutional rights are for people. So whales are not stakeholders in SeaWorld. That's what we learned from that. Okay, so then why are we adding planet as a 3rd bottom line? I would say that to a certain extent it's a proxy for just people. We say planet, but what we're really doing by that is we are correcting for market failure, because addressing all the interests of the wealth contributors, the team, the local community, the suppliers, the employees, that's not big enough. There's the world out there that there's still negative externalities that are being posed that we can't shepherd in through stakeholderism. There's also a sense of global social justice. That's where sort of what's going on here, planet, what eventually happens? Third people in developing countries are better off. Okay, so then what else might we be doing here? Well, we're combating speciesism, right? This is sort of was part of our moral progress. And then there are competing moral concerns that we can talk about that are really interesting to talk about, and here, which are intergenerational equity, right? Okay, so you have starving people over here in this country, and then you have future generations who are going to be living on the planet we leave them, and you got to start making trade-offs there, it's not just trade-offs, it's like you have to make a decision, to morally make a stand. And then there's also the deep ecology, which is, you actually think the planet is a moral agent that we need to rearrange our relationship with. And so that's at the end where we get, it's the people versus the planet. It's the people living here versus the planet in deep ecology. So that's, thank you very much. Looking forward to questions.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I guess we could do the Monty Python now for something completely different. I'd like to tell you about some concepts that we're trying to put in place here at the university that we think will enable us to develop therapeutics to treat unmet medical needs in efficient ways within the university setting. And so it is a work in progress, and I think, I hope you'll find it interesting, and I hope perhaps we can have a nice dialogue about it. So there's a problem right now in general in terms of generating new therapeutics. The pharmaceutical industry is rearranging their efforts. So the R&D effort is becoming little r and big D. Most of the big pharmaceutical companies are largely becoming development companies, and they're seeking their early stage pipelines by external partnering. Now, that wouldn't be necessarily a bad thing. However, the likely source of that pipeline would be universities and small companies, and both of those are probably more stressed than they've been in a long time. As far as universities go, the NIH funding level, even in the most optimistic scenarios, is flat and probably shrinking. And early stage venture capital funding for companies is definitely hard to find. So there has always been this area we call the Valley of Death, which is shown here on top. It's this area between where you've identified what we call a lead candidate, something that looks like it has many of the properties that you'd want for a drug, but not all, and bringing that into the clinic. Those are areas that are hard to do. The funding for government has traditionally not been there, and most investors consider that funding those areas very high risk and therefore weren't willing to do it. But now that Valley of Death is getting wider and deeper, and this is a particular problem for the developing world where there are a huge number of unmet medical needs. So Emory is a good place to try a new experiment like this because we've been particularly successful at bringing drugs from the benchtop to the bedside. In particular, this is an article that was published just about a year ago in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it rated drugs that were discovered in the public sector. And you won't be surprised that the most prolific source of drugs in the public sector was the National Institutes of Health. They have a huge intramural research program, thousands and thousands of scientists, and they know what they're doing. And they succeeded in the time period covered by this article in bringing 22 drugs to the clinic. That was followed by the entire University of California system. Some of the top universities in the country are part of the California system, and they contributed 11. The Venerable Cancer Institute in New York, Memorial Sloan Kettering, contributed 8, and Emory did 7. So as a single university, we were the most prolific of any in the country. I always like to remind my friends at Yale that they were number 5. This is just to give you a little outline. This is our product pipeline at Emory, and to the far right in dark green are compounds that have been approved by the FDA, and then in the middle are compounds that are in clinical trials, and the orange are compounds that are preclinical. And these are the ones that were discovered in my lab. So we've been particularly good at getting these things through. We've also started a number of companies, and the most recent one that you might have heard of is a company called Pharmaset, which about 2 weeks ago was purchased by Gilead Sciences for over $11 billion. So again, we've been successful. Yet, having gone through this, it's been very, very painful to bring these things forward. We've tried to set up some infrastructure to make this process more efficient, and we've tried to bring in experienced people so that we don't make novice mistakes. Recently, we hired a good friend, George Painter, who has been in pharma for 25 years, and he has a stellar record of achievement, and he's now the new director of the Emory Institute for Drug Discovery, which I'll tell you about in just a second. But the real question I wanted to pose to you is, how can a small focused group of experienced drug developers catalyze the transformation of R&D discoveries into products that have global impact? And remember, I'm a chemist, so I use the definition of catalyze in a very strict way. A catalyst is an agent that speeds up a process, but importantly is not consumed in that process. And so I don't want to get consumed in this process, so I like that idea. Now, one day I sat down and I said, well, what kind of skill sets are needed in a fully integrated pharmaceutical company? And I'm sure I missed many of them, but in just about 20 minutes of thinking about it, I listed a huge number of skill sets that could never be reproduced at a university. So it would be foolhardy to try. So you might say, well, why bother? Well, I think this model of the fully integrated pharmaceutical company is now generally considered a defunct model, and pharmaceutical companies are even changing their style. So we decided to do something that is radically different here at Emory, and we actually call this by the acronym DRIVE, which is Drug Innovation Ventures at Emory. And so first I want to tell you a little bit about DRIVE and what it is. First, it's a not-for-profit company. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Emory, and we've spun it out. Now, why do we want to do that? The other panelists alluded briefly to some of the differences between for-profits and not-for-profits, and clearly, if you want to get investors and you're a nonprofit, you have a problem. Well, let's go through this because I think it's an interesting model. 2 years ago, we set up the Emory Institute for Drug Discovery, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, but the idea here was we were going to put in the key skill sets and infrastructure needed to move compounds efficiently through that valley of death, the preclinical development process. And we did that. We had very good people, very good equipment, people with a lot of experience, and we still ran into a lot of problems. And the problems were not about science. The problems were about culture and policy within the university. Let me give you an example. The university, every university I know, their intellectual property policy is set up to reward inventors exclusively. So if you invent something that ultimately leads to a drug, you do very well as far as your policy goes. But if I spent $1 million to do something on the development of a drug, I have no mechanism in place at Emory or any other university that I know of to get a return on my investment. Also, when monies come in to the university, they must get distributed to stakeholders immediately, and that doesn't give you any opportunity to reinvest and do additional things. So that was a problem. There are all sorts of other cultural issues associated with working in a university. So by spinning out a not-for-profit, a separate legal entity, we can now license technologies from Emory, from other universities, from other companies, and we can do a fair market value license with the university, and we can now use our funds that we either bring along with us or that we get from government, from corporate partners, from foundations, into the company to develop these drugs to one of several price inflection points. And then when we reach these financial milestones, we can give Emory or whoever we license the technology from what they get, what they deserve from their license, and whatever we have left over, whatever the delta is, we can reinvest in the process. And our exits will be third-party licenses, or if we work with venture capitalists who need equity, we can spin out for-profits on given technology and help to operate those companies virtually. Also, since DRIVE, the people in DRIVE have joint appointments at the Emory Institute for Drug Discovery. We have a simple line management capability to direct this, and the EIDD will become our primary outsourcing group. So within the EIDD, we've developed a number of very key disciplines that aren't terribly important necessarily to you here, but they are the ones that enable us to go forward. Plus, through this mechanism, when people work with Drive through the EIDD, we have access to all of the intellectual and physical assets at Emory. So if we want to look at a combination between a vaccine and an antiviral, we can do that by working with our vaccine center. It's a lot harder for someone on the outside to directly work with people on the inside. So we set up a lot of efficiencies that work here, and in particular, we bring together experienced people. We have some very nice cost control mechanisms and that will mitigate risk. We can work with companies on a shared risk basis, for example, or if we want to work with a pharmaceutical company, instead of them spinning out a whole new company to test a technology and having to hire a CEO and a CSO and buy equipment and rent space and all the other things, they can actually just work with us and instead of spending $10 or $15 million to start the company, perhaps just spend $1 million on the project. So it's an interesting experiment, cost efficiencies, we get access to Emory assets. We're particularly interested in neglected diseases, and we want to be sure that since we are a university and since we don't have responsibilities to our shareholders, that we find a way of making a difference for people all over the world. So some years ago, we started a program with South Africa, and the program had two general purposes. One was to catalyze the formation of new commercial entities, and the second was intertwined with that, that is to be sure that those new commercial entities had properly trained personnel. We put in a knowledge transfer program where we trained South African scientists in the science, legal, and business aspects of the biopharmaceutical industry. And this program has turned out to be a great success. So we have a training program where people can come to Emory or several other venues, spend a year, and learn the trade, learn how to do it. And they can do it either in a big corporate environment, a university environment, or a small company environment, depending on which one of the partners they choose. And these people have gone back to South Africa, and many of them have actually started companies. We also run a bioplan competition where groups can submit technologies for evaluation, and we'll take the top 8 or 10 technologies, assign them mentoring teams, and the mentoring teams help them to put together a business plan, and the business plan then gets judged by a group of international entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, and they can go forward in interesting ways. There have been a lot of benefits to the scientists in terms of developing new perspectives, new business skills. They become aware of relevant legal issues. So many of them who were very bright were making all sorts of novice business and legal mistakes. So it's been quite helpful. And they had access to the resources of Emory and our partners. So it's been a very nice, successful program. We started a company 3 years ago called Itemba Pharmaceuticals in South Africa, and Itemba is a word in many African languages that means hope. And the advantages of this company are many. First, we have low operating costs. A South African friend of mine said, "Oh, we pay South African scientists the same thing that you pay American scientists. The difference is we pay in rand and you pay in dollars." And it's pretty close, 7.5 to 1. So it's a very significant ratio. The kinds of diseases that we're trying to address don't really require marketing. We only deal with governments and NGOs, so that saves a huge amount of money. Most philanthropists wouldn't think about investing or giving a gift to Merck, but they might give a gift to a South African company that was involved in addressing unmet medical needs in sub-Saharan Africa. We have the opportunity for dual branding. So if we find a therapeutic that works against diseases that are prevalent in both the developing world and the developed world, we can now create two different brands, one low-cost brand for the developing world and a higher-cost brand for the developed world, and then use the profits we make from the developed world to plow back in and address other unmet medical needs. And we put together a huge group of founders and advisors who are all seasoned drug developers, people who really want to find a way of giving something back, and the best thing that they can possibly give back is their knowledge. So we've created a global network that involves governments, foundations, companies, large and small, research institutes, NGOs, and universities. And on a case-by-case basis, the network and the components of the network will change, but we're putting these together in an attempt to be nimble and efficient and to address things in ways that couldn't be addressed before. I'm a firm believer that in the developing world, there are viable markets. And all this company in South Africa needs to do is to make enough profits to be sustainable. So we may not make hit blockbuster profits, but if we can get a good return on investment by selling large volumes of pharmaceuticals with low margins, I think we have something very interesting. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, we'll take questions now. If you could just find one of the microphones if you have a question. Just over here.
Stakeholders will have standing to sue officers, directors, or board members for breach of the non-fiduciary duties? And if so, how do you draw lines around who falls within those new potential plaintiffs and who doesn't? And what impact do you see that additional liability or at least litigation cost having on willingness to embrace these new entities?
Okay, so as of today, all of the social enterprise forms of organization that are available specifically deny standing to anyone but investors. And I think it's a tough issue because, as your question I think kind of anticipates, if you were to broaden standing, right, then you fear that folks won't adopt the form or they won't find folks willing to serve as fiduciaries because they're open to too many suits. This is an argument that gets made all the time in nonprofit law about why we don't have broad standing to sue nonprofit directors. On the other side, though, if the only stakeholder group that is empowered to sue on a fiduciary duty theory is shareholders, I wonder if they're going to be effective enforcers of a dual mission, right? So even if you assume that the folks who would buy in as shareholders to these organizations in the first place are kind of your socially responsible investor category, right? However big that is, that's a big question, right? Folks who want to mix return on investment with some kind of social return. Even if you believe that's true at the outset, if what they see happening is because of disclosures or whatever, they believe their fiduciaries are veering from that dual mission and pursuing more profit, would it be rational for them to sue? Or would it be rational for them to take the profit and give it to someone who's doing what they want on the social return side, right? So I think there's a question on either way you go on that standing question of whether you're going to get kind of optimal enforcement of a dual mission. But at the moment, all of the forms that are available in the US deny standing to everyone but investors.
I think that about covers it.
Okay, I always like to give the panelists a chance to ask questions of each other as well, because obviously there's different degrees of knowing each other here. Do you guys have any questions for each other about anything?
I'm just still sitting here just stupefied with what Dennis is doing.
I agree.
It's just amazing.
We'll turn that into a question. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, I have a question for Dr. Lyotta. One of your slides made reference to Yerkes Primate Center. What can Emory alumnus do to help persuade Emory that it should not be engaged in testing drugs, et cetera, on primates?
So I think that there are probably going to be differing opinions on that subject. You note that the NIH recently banned future studies on chimpanzees. So there's a large chimpanzee colony at Yerkes, for example, and I think they're going to be exempt from any further drug evaluations. Some people think that is a great idea. Some people think that is not a good idea. The pros and cons of these are many. You know that many of us are animal lovers. I've always had pets, and I cherish them the way almost everyone I know does. On the other hand, my job is about saving lives, and you know, some scientists measure their success by the number of times their articles get cited. I like to do it by the number of people whose lives we save. And if we can do that more effectively by running tests on animals, then I think it's our responsibility to do that. I think we have to do that in the most cautious, well thought out way possible. But I know this is a controversial issue, and I know people have very strong, passionate views about it, and I'm not trying to take a side one way or tell anyone that they're wrong. I do, however, believe that there are tremendous efficiencies in certain cases when we can do evaluations in animals, and when those tests translate, when we know they translate very well to human results, we can expedite the process very quickly and save lives. So it's a tough issue. I appreciate you raising it, and it's one that we need to have continuing dialogue about.
I have a question for the panelists. I'm an economist myself, and so I wonder if there's been any change in the interest level or demand for these socially responsible businesses, or all the fancy lingo you guys use to refer to these, during the downturn in the economy over the last few years.
I can say from a granular level what my experience is, and maybe if you guys have something at a more macro level. What I've found is the downturn has been a boon for socially responsible business, for social enterprise, due primarily to the fact that when people are primarily motivated to go into the office every day because of money, and the money isn't there anymore, they start thinking about, why else would I work? What else matters to me? What is meaningful? You know, where is the purpose found? And so I find that this has been a good time for social entrepreneurship because of that.
I would say, you know, from the literature, the interest doesn't seem to be dimming, and I think there's such a critique in this downturn of the usual practices of the, especially big business world, that I think this is kind of a trope that's been used by folks who are interested in pushing social enterprise as kind of see what happens when you don't embrace more than just profit, to make not only the moral argument, but an efficiency kind of argument for these types of enterprises. So I don't have empirics, but as far as the literature, that's what I would say.
Well, this is a moment when you'd say, well, everything has been said, but not everybody has said it.
You're good.
What they said.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I think we're a couple minutes early, but we can hopefully continue the discussion outside. So thanks to all the panelists for coming today.
This is what